Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments and the name of someone who showed up for you when no one else would. Doreen Hollister had been sitting in the emergency room waiting area at St. Margaret's Hospital for 4 hours and 17 minutes when the woman at the intake desk told her for the third time that they could not see her. It was a Tuesday night in November. Doreen was 73 years old. She was wearing her good coat, a dark blue wool coat that her husband had bought her for her 60th birthday. And her hair was pinned back the way she had worn it for the last 50 years. She had bruising on the left side of her face. Her left eye was nearly swollen shut. Her wrist was cradled in her lap at an angle that should not have been possible. She had been hit by a car in the grocery store parking lot at 4 in the afternoon, and the driver had not stopped. She had walked to the hospital, 6 blocks, in the cold, holding her broken wrist. Mrs. Hollister. The woman at the desk had a name tag that said Brenda. Brenda was in her 30s. She did not look up from her computer. I told you, your insurance has lapsed. We cannot admit you tonight. You need to call your provider in the morning and get this resolved. My insurance has not lapsed. My husband is a Vietnam veteran. We have VA coverage. We have had it for 50 years. The system shows it has lapsed. There is nothing I can do. Then I will pay cash. It's not just about payment, Mom. We have protocols. Without verified insurance, we cannot. I have been sitting here for 4 hours. My wrist is broken. I can feel the bones moving. Please just let me see a doctor. Ma'am, you're going to need to lower your voice. A young man in scrubs walked past. He glanced at Doreen. He did not stop. A nurse pushed an empty wheelchair past her. She did not look. 2 security guards stood by the front door, watching her in the calm, bored way of men who had decided she was a problem they did not want to deal with. Doreen sat in the plastic chair. She looked at her wrist. She thought about her husband, Sam, who was at home, who did not know where she was, who was 80 years old and could not drive anymore because of his Parkinson's. She thought about calling him. She thought about how he would try to come to her if she did, and how he would fall trying to get to the car, and how that would make everything worse. She did not call Sam. She called her son instead. Frank Hollister, 48 years old, lived in Pittsburgh, 2 hours away. She had been trying not to bother him. He had a job and 3 kids and his own life. But she was out of options. Frank answered on the second ring. Mom? Frankie, I need help, she told him. She kept her voice low. The intake clerk was still typing at her computer 20 feet away. The security guards were still watching the door. When Doreen finished talking, there was a long silence on the line. Then Frank said, Mom, stay where you are. Do not leave that hospital. Do not let them make you leave. I'm going to make some calls. Someone is going to be there in 15 minutes. Frankie, who? Who could Mom, just stay there. Do you trust me? I trust you. Stay there. I love you. Frank hung up. Doreen sat in the plastic chair. She looked at her wrist. The bones were definitely moving. She could feel them shifting slightly when she breathed. She closed her eyes. She tried not to cry. Crying would make Brenda call the security guards over, and the security guards would make her leave, and her son had told her to stay. She did not know who Frankie could possibly call. She did not know that Frank Hollister had been the chapter president of the Pittsburgh Hells Angels for the last 16 years. She did not know that Frank had inherited the position from his father, that her husband, Sam Hollister, The quiet Vietnam veteran she had been married to for 51 years had been a founding member of the Pittsburgh chapter in 1979 and had been chapter president himself for 19 years before he had retired. She did not know that the man at the intake desk had been a Hell's Angel for almost his entire adult life. She did not know that her son had just made 3 phone calls, and that those 3 phone calls had set in motion something that the staff at St. Margaret's Hospital was about to remember for the rest of their lives. The first rumble came at 8:47. Brenda looked up from her computer. The 2 security guards turned toward the door. The few other patients in the waiting room, a young mother with a feverish toddler, an old man holding his stomach, a teenager with a cut hand, all looked up at the same time. The sound was unmistakable, the deep collective rumble of dozens of motorcycle engines building, getting closer. Doreen opened her eyes. She did not understand. She looked toward the front doors of the hospital. The sliding glass doors opened automatically as headlights swept across the parking lot. A single motorcycle pulled up at the entrance. A Harley Davidson. A big bearded man in his late 40s dismounted. He was wearing the leather cut of the Hells Angels, the distinctive winged death's head emblem on the back, the bottom rocker that said Pittsburgh. He walked through the sliding doors. He looked at Doreen. It was Frank. He had ridden from Pittsburgh in just under 2 hours. He should not have been able to make it that fast. He must have been doing over 100 miles an hour the whole way. He walked to his mother. He knelt down beside her chair. He looked at her face. He looked at her wrist. His jaw tightened. "Mom, Frankie, how did you—" "It doesn't matter. I'm here. Don't move. Don't say anything. Just sit. The others are coming." "The others?" Frank stood up. He looked at the front doors. The rumble was louder now. It was no longer just a few motorcycles. It was a wave, a wall of sound. The lights in the waiting room flickered slightly as something massive moved into the parking lot outside. Brenda stood up at her desk. Sir, you cannot be in here without— What is happening outside? What is—" The sliding doors opened again. The first wave of bikers walked in. 10 of them, all Hell's Angels, all wearing their cuts. They walked silently, with the heavy, controlled walk of men who had been to many places together and who knew how to enter a room as a unit. They did not say anything. They simply walked in and arranged themselves in a loose perimeter around Doreen's chair. Then the second wave. 20 more. They came through the doors in a steady stream. The waiting room began to fill with bikers. Then the third wave. 30 more. The 2 security guards by the door had taken 3 steps backward and were now pressed against the wall. They were not trained for this. There was no protocol for this. They simply stood there. Brenda was on her phone. She was trying to call someone. Her hands were shaking. The bikers kept coming. Outside in the parking lot, the rumble of engines continued. Doreen could see through the front windows the parking lot filling with motorcycles, rows of them, headlights bright, engines idling. More were arriving every minute from every direction. The rumble carrying through the cold November night, the sound of 100 Harleys, then 200, then more. Frank looked at his mother. "Mom, I want you to meet some friends of mine and of Dad's." Doreen looked up. Standing around her in a loose semicircle that filled the waiting room and that now extended out through the doors into the parking lot were over 300 Hell's Angels. Men in their 40s and 50s and 60s, Men with long grey and white beards, men in worn leather cuts covered in patches, men she had never met, but who, she would learn over the next 20 minutes, all knew her name. The man at the front of the semicircle was a large, older biker with a long white beard and a Pittsburgh chapter cut. He stepped forward. "Mrs. Hollister, my name is Reuben Castile. I rode with your husband Sam for 37 years. He is one of the great men I have known. I am the current chapter VP. I am here because my chapter president called me an hour ago and told me his mother had been hit by a car and was being refused care at St. Margaret's Hospital. I came as fast as I could. I brought everyone I could reach. The chapters from Cleveland and Erie and Wheeling are still on the way." Doreen could not speak. Reuben turned. He looked at Brenda at the intake desk. He looked at the security guards pressed against the wall. He looked at the empty doctors' stations behind the desk. "Mum," Reuben said, to Brenda. His voice was calm and low. "We need to talk to whoever runs this hospital. Right now." Brenda picked up her phone. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely dial. I'm calling the administrator." "Good. Tell her to come quickly. Tell her that Mrs. Doreen Hollister, age 73, the wife of a Vietnam veteran and the mother of the Pittsburgh chapter president of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, has been sitting in this waiting room with a broken wrist and facial bruising for over 4 hours. Tell her that the insurance issue she is hiding behind is going to be resolved tonight, one way or another. Tell her that 300 Hells Angels are now in her hospital, and that the only way we are leaving is with Mrs. Hollister being treated by a doctor." Right now, Brenda was crying. She picked up the phone. She dialed. The bikers stood in silence. They did not raise their voices. They did not threaten. They simply stood. 300 men in leather, surrounding a small old woman in a dark blue coat, in the waiting room of a hospital in western Pennsylvania on a Tuesday night in November of 2025. Outside, more motorcycles were arriving. Doreen looked at her son. She looked at the men around her. She looked at the parking lot full of headlights and engines and bikers. She put her hand on Frank's arm with her good hand. "Frankie," she whispered, "I had no idea. Your father, I had no idea." Frank knelt beside her chair. He held her good hand carefully. "Mum, I'm sorry you have to find out this way. There's a lot we need to talk about. Dad has been keeping things from you for 50 years. So have I. But that's a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight, you are going to see a doctor, and you are going to see what your husband built, and what these men think of him, and what they think of you." Doreen looked at the 300 Hells Angels surrounding her. For the first time in her life, she understood that her quiet, kind Sam, the man she had been married to for 51 years, the gentle gardener who watched the news in his recliner every night, the trembling old man with Parkinson's at home in their small house, was not who she had thought he was. He was something else, something more. And the men around her had ridden through the cold November night. 300 of them, on Harleys, from chapters across 4 states, because Sam Hollister was their brother, and because Doreen Hollister was their brother's wife. The hospital administrator arrived 11 minutes later. Her name was Patricia Voss. She was in her early 50s. She wore a grey pantsuit and carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had spent her career managing crises. She walked through the front doors of the hospital and stopped. She had not been told what she was walking into. 300 Hell's Angels stood in the waiting room and out into the parking lot. They were silent. They were arranged in a wide, protective semicircle around a small old woman in a dark blue coat. The intake clerk was sitting at her desk, crying. The two security guards were pressed against the wall, not moving. Patricia Voss took a breath. Ruben Castile stepped forward. "Ms. Voss, my name is Ruben Castile. I would like to introduce you to Mrs. Doreen Hollister." Ruben extended his hand toward Doreen, who was still sitting in the plastic chair. Patricia looked at Doreen. She saw the bruising on her face. She saw the wrist cradled at the wrong angle. She saw the 4 hours of waiting on the woman's face. Patricia walked over to Doreen. She knelt down. She did not look at the bikers. She looked at the woman in the chair. "Mrs. Hollister, I am Patricia Voss. I am the administrator of this hospital. I am so deeply sorry that you have been sitting here for this long. There is no excuse for what has happened to you tonight." Doreen did not say anything. Patricia stood up. She turned. She walked to Brenda at the intake desk. "Brenda, why is this woman not being seen?" "Ma'am, the system, her insurance, I do not care what the system says. This woman has a broken wrist. She has facial bruising. She has been here for 4 hours. Why is she not being seen?" Brenda was crying too hard to answer. Patricia turned back. She raised her voice slightly, not in anger, but in command. "I need a doctor at the intake desk right now. I need a trauma team. I need someone to bring a wheelchair. I'm moving Mrs. Hollister to a private exam room. Right now." Within 90 seconds, a doctor appeared. A nurse pushed a wheelchair through the swinging doors. Patricia Voss personally helped Doreen out of the plastic chair and into the wheelchair. The doctor, a young man in his 30s, embarrassed in the way doctors are embarrassed when they have not done their jobs, apologized to Doreen as he wheeled her toward the back. Frank walked beside the wheelchair. Ruben spoke to Patricia. "Ms. Voss, we're going to stay here until Mrs. Hollister has been treated and discharged. We are not going to disturb your hospital. We are not going to interfere with your other patients. We are just going to stay. Is that acceptable?" Patricia looked at the 300 bikers in her waiting room. She looked at the parking lot full of motorcycles. She looked at Ruben. "That is acceptable. I would also like to speak with you and Mr. Hollister, Frank, after Mrs. Hollister has been moved. There is going to be a full investigation of what happened here tonight, effective immediately. I want to know how this woman was treated this way, and I want you to be part of that conversation. We will be." Patricia walked back to her office. The bikers stood in the waiting room. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply waited. Doreen was in an exam room within minutes. The doctor, Dr. Marcus Reyes, second-year resident, deeply rattled by what was happening in his hospital, examined her wrist. He sent her to X-ray. The wrist was broken in 2 places. The cheekbone was bruised, but not fractured. The eye would heal. The wrist would need a cast, and possibly a small surgery. She was admitted for observation overnight. Frank stayed with her. He sat in a chair beside her hospital bed. The nurse had given Doreen a mild painkiller. She was groggy, but awake. "Frankie." "Yeah, Mom. Tell me about your father." Frank looked at his mother. He had been waiting 40 years for this conversation. Sam had told him when Frank had joined the club at age 22 in 1997 that the day was going to come when his mother would find out. Sam had told him that when that day came, Frank should tell her the truth. All of it. Sam had said, Your mother is a strong woman. She has been strong enough to be married to me for 46 years without knowing. She will be strong enough to know. That had been 28 years ago. Now the day had come. Mum, Dad joined the Hells Angels in 1972. He was 27. He had been home from Vietnam for 3 years. He was not doing well. You know that. You met him in 1973. You only saw the man he had become after he found the club. The club helped him get through what he had brought back from Vietnam. It gave him brothers. It gave him a purpose. It gave him people who understood what he had seen, because most of them had seen the same things. Doreen was watching him. Her good eye was fixed on her son's face. He was a founding member of the Pittsburgh chapter in 1979. He was chapter president from 1985 to 2004. He retired from the road when his Parkinson's started getting bad in 2014. But he is still... Mom, he is the most respected former chapter president in the Pittsburgh area, maybe in the eastern half of the country. The men outside in that waiting room, almost every one of them rode with Dad at some point. Many of them were patched in by Dad. Many of them call him Pop or Old Sam or the man. Dad is a legend in our world, Mom. He just never wanted you to know. Why? Why did he hide it? Frank thought about how to answer. Mom, when Dad met you in 1973, you were a Catholic school teacher. You were 30 years old. You were the kindest person he had ever met. You had values. You had a life. You did not deserve to be tied up in what he had become. He thought, he believed, that you would not marry him if you knew. He kept it from you to protect you. And then, by the time he could have told you, he had been keeping it from you for so long that he did not know how to start. All those nights he said he was going to the VFW or going to the auto shop with his friends. Most of those nights he was at chapter meetings or doing rides or doing the work that being a chapter president required. All those years, 51 years, he never trusted me with it. Mom, it was not about trust. It was about love. He thought he was protecting you. He was wrong. I told him he was wrong. He knew he was wrong. He never figured out how to fix it. Doreen was quiet for a long time. She looked at the ceiling. The painkiller was making the lights slightly soft at the edges. Frankie, when did you join? I was 22. 1997. You have been a Hell's Angel for 28 years, and I did not know that either. No, you did not. And you are the chapter president now. I am. I have been for 16 years. I took over from a man named Dale Wickham, who took over from Dad in 2004. Doreen turned her head. She looked at her son. He was 48 years old. He had her brown eyes and his father's strong jaw. He had been her quiet, careful boy, the son who became a respiratory therapist at a hospital in Pittsburgh, the son who came to Sunday dinners with his wife and his 3 children, the son she thought she had known her whole life. Frankie, you lied to me for 28 years. I did, Mom. I am sorry. Why did you never tell me? Because Dad asked me not to. Because he said it was his story to tell. Because he kept saying he would tell you, and then he never did. And I kept waiting for him to do it. And now you have Parkinson's-related dementia symptoms starting up too. Yes, Mom, the doctor told me last month, even though he did not tell you. And I was afraid that if you found out now, you would forget that you had found out, and we would have to keep finding ways to tell you, over and over. So I kept waiting. I was wrong. I should have told you years ago." Doreen was quiet. "Tonight," Frank continued, "when you called me, and you said you were at the hospital, and you said they would not see you, I knew. I knew that the only way to get them to see you tonight was for me to do exactly what I did. I called Reuben. He called everyone he could reach. The chapters mobilized. They came because Sam Hollister's wife was being mistreated. They came because it was the right thing to do. They came because... Mom, listen. They came because they love Dad. And because they have been waiting their whole lives for a way to thank him for what he gave them. Tonight was their way." Doreen was crying. She had not been able to cry earlier. The painkiller had loosened something in her. The tears came now, quiet and steady, sliding down her bruised cheek. "I had no idea," she said. "All these years, I had no idea. I know, Mom. I am sorry. Don't apologize, just tell me everything. Right now, while I can still understand it. Tell me about your father. Tell me who he really was, who he really is." Frank pulled his chair closer to the bed. He took his mother's good hand. He started talking. He told her about Vietnam first, about what Sam had been before the war and what he had been after. He told her about the small things Sam had done in the early years of the club, the rides he had organized for veterans' funerals, the money he had raised for the families of fallen Marines, the quiet visits he had made to other veterans who were not doing well, the way he had pulled men back from the edge of suicide more than once in the 1970s and 1980s. He told her about the work the chapter had done over the decades, the toy drives at Christmas, the escort rides for abused women fleeing dangerous situations, the fundraisers for sick children, the protection details for families who had received death threats, the small, careful network of mutual aid that the Pittsburgh Hells Angels had built across western Pennsylvania for 50 years, mostly invisible to the public, mostly known only to the people who had been on the receiving end. He told her that Sam had personally raised over $400,000 over the years for the families of Vietnam veterans who had committed suicide. The money had been quiet. Sam had never put his name on any of it. The families had known him only as the old Marine from Pittsburgh. He told her about the night in 1988 when Sam had ridden 300 miles in a snowstorm to deliver insulin to a diabetic veteran in West Virginia who could not afford his medication. Sam had not told her about that night. He had told her he was going to a chapter meeting that ran late. He told her about the day in 2001 when Sam had organized a 100-bike funeral procession for a soldier who had been killed in Afghanistan and whose family did not have any other riders to honor the casket. Sam had told her he was going fishing that day. He told her about the fund, the Hollister Fund, named for Sam, set up by the chapter in 2008, that had paid for the burials of 37 indigent Vietnam veterans over the past 17 years. Sam had told her the fund was named for someone else. He told her everything. Doreen listened. Her tears continued. She did not interrupt. She held her son's hand and let him talk. When Frank finally stopped, the room was quiet. The hospital hummed around them. The small sounds of monitors, of distant footsteps, of the soft mechanical ambience of a hospital at night. "Frankie, take me home tomorrow, as soon as they let me. I need to see your father." "I will." "And Frankie." "Yes, Mom. Tell those men out there, the ones who came tonight, tell them thank you. From me, from Sam, from both of us. I will. Doreen closed her eyes. The painkiller pulled her under. She slept. Frank sat beside the bed for a long time. Then he stood up. He walked out of the hospital room. He walked back to the waiting area. The bikers were still there, all 300 of them, plus the additional 50 or 60 who had arrived in the past hour. The Cleveland chapter, the Erie chapter, 2 chapters from Wheeling that had ridden together. 360 Hell's Angels stood in the waiting area and out into the parking lot of St. Margaret's Hospital on a Tuesday night in November. Frank walked into the center of the waiting room. He stopped. He looked at the men. "She's going to be okay," Frank said. His voice carried in the silent room. "Broken wrist, some bruising. They are going to keep her overnight. I will take her home tomorrow." The bikers did not cheer. They did not applaud. They simply nodded. The collective relief moved through the room in a quiet wave. "My mother asked me to tell you thank you. From her, from my father. She is going to understand a lot of things tomorrow that she has not understood for 50 years. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for showing her who Dad is. Thank you for showing her who you are." Reuben Castile stepped forward. "Frank, tell Sam we love him. Tell him the road is still ours. Tell him his boys came when his wife needed us." "I will, Reuben." Frank looked at the men. "Go home. Ride safe. The mission is over." The mission was successful. The bikers started to move. They filed out of the waiting room slowly, 2 and 3 at a time, walking back to their motorcycles. The deep rumble of engines started in the parking lot. 1 at a time, then dozens, then all of them. The sound built into a thunder that filled the November night. 360 Harley-Davidsons started up and pulled out of the parking lot in waves. By midnight, the parking lot was empty. The hospital was quiet. Doreen Hollister slept in her hospital bed. Frank Hollister sat in the chair beside her and stayed awake for the rest of the night. Patricia Voss did not go home that night. She walked back to her office at midnight after the last of the motorcycles had pulled out of the parking lot, and she sat at her desk and pulled up the digital record of Doreen Hollister's intake. She read it carefully. She read every note Brenda had entered. She read the insurance verification logs. She read the time stamps. Doreen had checked in at 4:38 in the afternoon. The first insurance verification attempt had been logged at 4:41. The system had returned an error, not a lapsed notice, but a temporary technical error. The kind of error that should have prompted a manual verification call to the VA. Brenda had not made the call. Brenda had marked the verification as failed and had moved Doreen to a deferred status. The deferred status was a flag that the hospital used for patients whose insurance could not be verified. A flag that did not technically deny care, but that allowed the intake clerk to deprioritize the patient until the verification was resolved. Patricia pulled up Brenda's record of patient prioritizations from the past 6 months. She found a pattern. Brenda had used the deferred status 43 times in 6 months. Of those 43 patients, the demographics were striking. Almost all were elderly. Almost all were on government insurance, VA, Medicare, Medicaid. Almost all had eventually been seen, but after waits that averaged over 3 hours. Patricia pulled up Brenda's hiring file. She had been hired 8 months ago. She had come from a private clinic in a wealthy suburb. Her references had described her as efficient and detail-oriented. Patricia read the words again. Efficient, detail-oriented. She put down her tablet. She picked up her phone. She called the hospital's chief medical officer at his home. He was awake. He had heard about the Hells Angels incident, and he had been waiting for her call. "Doug, we have a problem. It is bigger than tonight. Tell me," Patricia told him. She told him about the pattern in Brenda's records. She told him about the 43 deferred patients. She told him that this had not been a single incident, that what had happened to Doreen Hollister had been happening in slightly different forms to elderly veterans and Medicare patients for months. Doug was quiet for a long moment. "Patricia, get a full review started tomorrow morning. Every patient that woman has touched, every one. I want a full audit. I want to know what we have been allowing." "I will." She hung up. She sat at her desk in the quiet hospital. She thought about the small old woman she had moved to a private exam room 4 hours earlier. She thought about the bikers who had filled her waiting room. She thought about how close her hospital had come to a much worse outcome. A public scandal, federal investigations, the loss of Medicare certification. She thought, in particular, about a thought that was uncomfortable to think. The Hells Angels had probably saved her hospital. If Frank Hollister had not been the son, if Ruben Castile had not made the calls, if 360 bikers had not filled her waiting room, Doreen Hollister would have eventually been sent home. The story would have stayed quiet. The pattern would have continued. Brenda would have kept doing what she was doing. More elderly patients would have been treated the way Doreen had been treated. The bikers had broken the pattern. Patricia Voss sat at her desk and made a decision. The decision was that tomorrow morning she was going to do everything in her power to make sure this hospital became the kind of place that did not need bikers to enforce its own standards. Doreen was released the next morning at 10. Patricia personally walked her out. She helped her to the patient pickup area where Frank was waiting with the truck. A friend had driven the truck from Pittsburgh that morning, so Frank could take his mother home. Patricia put her hand on Doreen's good arm. "Mrs. Hollister, I owe you an apology. The full apology. Not just on behalf of this hospital, but personally. What happened to you last night should not have happened. It has been happening to other people for months, and we did not know. We do now. There is going to be a full investigation. The person who handled your intake will not be working at this hospital again. I want you to know that. I also want you to know that I am personally going to make sure that any veteran or veteran's family who comes to this emergency room from now on is treated the way they should be treated, from the moment they walk through the door." Doreen looked at Patricia. Her eye was less swollen now. The painkiller had worn off. She was lucid. She was tired. "Ms. Voss, I appreciate that, but I want you to know something. I am only here, talking to you, because my son knew people. If my son had not known the right people, I would have walked out of this hospital last night and gone home and tried to set my own wrist with a kitchen towel. I want you to think about that. There are people in this town who do not have a son who knows 300 Hells Angels. They need this hospital. They need it to work for them too. Not just for the people who can call in favors." Patricia nodded. She had tears in her eyes. "I will think about it. I am thinking about it. I will not stop thinking about it." Doreen squeezed Patricia's hand. She walked to the truck. Frank helped her in. They drove home. The drive from St. Margaret's to the small Hollister house in the suburbs of Wheeling took about 35 minutes. Doreen looked out the window. She did not talk. Frank did not push her. They drove in silence through the November morning. When they pulled into the driveway, Doreen looked at her house, the small white ranch house, the trimmed shrubs in front, the American flag on the porch that Sam had been hanging for 50 years, the garage that he had been parking his pickup in since 1979. Sam was on the front porch. He was leaning on his cane. He was 80 years old. The Parkinson's had bent him slightly forward at the shoulders, and his hands trembled visibly, even when he was not moving them. He was wearing the wool cardigan that Doreen had given him for Christmas 3 years earlier. His hair was completely white. His face was deeply lined. He had been told. Frank had called him from the hospital at 5 in the morning. Sam had not slept since the call. Doreen got out of the truck slowly. She walked toward the porch. Sam took a step forward. He stopped. He waited for her. Doreen walked up the porch steps. She stopped in front of her husband. She looked at him. Sam. Dor. Frankie told me everything. Sam's old face, the face she had been looking at for 51 years, collapsed slightly. The way an old man's face collapses when something he has been carrying for a long time is finally set down. His eyes welled up. He did not try to hide it. Dor, I am so sorry. I should have told you. I should have told you 60 years ago. Yes, Sam, you should have. She walked the rest of the way to him. She put her good arm around his waist. She put her head against his shoulder. The wool of his cardigan was warm. It smelled the way it always smelled, like the small particular scent of Sam Hollister that she had been smelling for half a century. I'm sorry, Dor. I'm so sorry. I know you are. We're going to talk about this. We are going to talk about all of it. But not on the porch, not standing up. Let's go inside. Let's sit down. Let's start. They went inside. Frank brought in his mother's small bag of hospital clothes. He set it down in the entryway. He helped his mother into the recliner. The one in the living room beside Sam's recliner. The recliner where they had been sitting beside each other every night for 51 years, watching the news. Doreen and Sam sat in their 2 recliners. Frank sat on the couch across from them. The November morning light came through the front window. Sam, Doreen said, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Sam started talking. He talked for 3 hours. He told her about Vietnam. Really told her, for the first time in 51 years of marriage. He told her about the things he had seen, the things he had done, the friends he had lost. He told her about coming home in 1969 and not knowing how to be a person who was not at war. He told her about the bottle of pills he had thought about taking in the spring of 1971. Pills he had hoarded over the course of several months, with the plan to take them all on a particular Saturday in March. He had not taken them. He had thrown them into the Allegheny River instead. He had ridden his motorcycle to the bridge that night and had stood at the railing and had thrown the bottle into the dark water, and the throwing had felt, in some way he could not explain, like a baptism. He told her about meeting the men who would later become the Pittsburgh chapter. He told her about how they had found him at a bar in 1972. 3 veterans who had recognized the look on his face, who had sat down at his table and started talking, who had given him their phone numbers and told him to call when he was bad. He told her about how he had called, about how they had come, about how the slow, steady work of being part of a brotherhood of damaged men had been the thing that had saved his life. He told her about meeting her in 1973, about how she had been the first woman since the war who had made him feel like he could be a regular person, about how he had decided almost immediately that he had to keep the club separate from her, about how he had thought he was protecting her, about how he had been wrong. He told her about every lie, every chapter meeting he had described as a VFW meeting, every funeral procession he had ridden in that he had described as going to help a friend, every late night he had spent doing the work of the club that he had described as working overtime at the shop. He listed them out, year by year, with the particular careful memory of an old man who had been carrying the lies long enough that he knew each of them by date. He told her about the violence too. He did not soften it. He had been involved in fights. He had been arrested twice in the 1970s, both times for charges that had been dropped, both times kept from her by the small, careful network of the chapter's connections. He had broken a man's jaw in 1978 in a parking lot in Cleveland. The man had been beating a woman. Sam had not regretted breaking the jaw. He had told her this so that she would know that he had not been an angel. The club was not a charity organization. The club was a brotherhood of men who had been at war and who had decided to continue being at war, just with different enemies and different rules of engagement. He told her about the good, about the rides, about the funerals, about the families they had helped, about the 37 veterans whose burials he had personally paid for, about the $400,000 he had raised over the years and given quietly to families he had not even met. He told her everything. Doreen listened. When Sam finally finished, his voice was hoarse. He had been crying off and on for 3 hours. Doreen had been crying too. Frank had brought them coffee and water twice. The morning had turned into the afternoon. The three of them sat in the small living room. The November light through the front window was now slanting in from the west. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked. Sam. Yes, Dor. Why didn't you trust me? Sam looked at his wife. The trembling in his hands was more pronounced when he was tired. His hands were trembling now. Dor. I trusted you. I never did not trust you. What I did not trust was the world. I did not trust that the world would let you stay married to a man like me if you knew the truth about who I was. I did not trust that you would be safe being publicly connected to the kind of life I had chosen. I was a coward, Dor. I was a coward not about you. I was a coward about what loving me would have cost you if it had been known. Sam, I have been loving you for 51 years. The cost has already been paid. I have just been paying it without knowing what I was buying. Sam closed his eyes. I know, Dor. I know. I am angry with you. Right now, I want you to know that. I am very angry. I have been lied to by my husband for 51 years, and I am angry. You have every right to be angry. But Sam, I am also looking at you, sitting in your recliner, 80 years old, trembling, the man who built 50 years of his life around protecting me from a truth he should have shared. And I am realizing that the anger is not the only thing I am feeling. The anger is real, but it is not. It is not the biggest thing. What is the biggest thing, Dor? Doreen looked at her husband, her bruised eye, her broken wrist in its sling, her face that had been beaten by a car in a parking lot the day before, her body that had been waiting in a hospital chair for 4 hours while it was being broken further. The biggest thing is this. Last night, 360 men came to a hospital because Sam Hollister's wife needed help. They came on motorcycles from 4 states. in the cold. They came because they love you. They came because of who you have been to them for 50 years. They came because the man I married, the man I have been living with, sleeping next to, eating dinner with, watching television beside for half a century, has been quietly making the world a different place than it would have been without him. He has been doing it for 50 years. He has not been doing it for credit. He has been doing it because it needed to be done. Doreen reached across the small space between their recliners. She put her good hand on Sam's trembling hand. Sam, I am angry, but I am also, Sam, I am also proud. I did not know who I was married to. I am finding out today. And what I am finding out is that I have been married for 51 years to a better man than I knew. A more complicated man. A man who has been carrying things he should have shared. But a better man, Sam. The lies were wrong. The man under the lies, he is the man I have always loved. He is more than I knew. Sam was crying. He held her good hand in his trembling one. Dor. Yes, Sam. I am sorry. I know you are. We are going to figure this out. We have time. We have whatever time we have left. I want us to spend it with the truth between us instead of the lies. Can we do that? Yes? Good. They sat in the November afternoon. Frank watched his parents from the couch. He was crying too, quietly. He had been waiting 40 years for this conversation. He had not known it was going to happen with him in the room. He was grateful, in the way sons are grateful for things, that he had been there to see it. After a while, Doreen looked at her son. Frankie, yes, Mom. I want to meet the men, the ones who came last night. I want to thank them. I want to know them. I want to be part of this thing that your father built, for whatever time we have left. They would like that, Mom. They have been waiting 50 years to meet you officially. Then call them. Call Reuben. Set something up. Soon. I am not as healthy as I was last week, and I do not want to wait. I will, Mom. And Frankie. Yes, Mom. Your father is going to write a list today of every man who has been important to him over the years, every man he has lost, every man he has helped, every name that should be remembered. We are going to spend the rest of his time learning those names. I am going to know them by heart by the time he goes. Sam was crying again. He nodded. He could not speak. All right, Mom. Doreen looked at her husband. Sam, I love you. You are the man I married. The lies are not the man. The man is the man under the lies. We are going to spend whatever time we have left living with the truth. Are you ready? Yes, Dor. Good. She squeezed his hand. Outside, the November afternoon continued. The grandfather clock ticked. The American flag on the porch moved gently in a small breeze. Inside, in a small living room in Wheeling, West Virginia, an 80-year-old former Hells Angels chapter president and his 73-year-old wife held hands across the gap between two old recliners, and a long secret ended. The hospital story made the local news the next morning. A reporter from the Wheeling Intelligencer had been at St. Margaret's the night of the incident, covering a separate story about emergency room wait times, and had witnessed the arrival of the Hells Angels. She had not approached the bikers that night. She had been smart enough to know that the story would be more powerful if she let it develop. She had spent the following day making calls. By Wednesday evening, she had pieced together most of what had happened. Her article ran on Thursday morning. The headline was, "When the System Failed, an Elderly Veteran's Wife 360 Hells Angels stepped in. The article was careful. It named Doreen Hollister with her permission. It did not name Sam. Frank had asked the reporter to keep his father's identity quiet, and the reporter had agreed. It described Brenda only as an intake clerk who is no longer employed at the hospital. It quoted Patricia Voss extensively. It outlined the pattern of 43 deferred patients that the internal audit had uncovered. It made clear that the hospital was undergoing a full review. The article went viral within hours. By Thursday afternoon, it had been picked up by AP. By Friday morning, it was on the Today Show. By the weekend, it was being discussed on national news. The story resonated. It resonated because it touched something that Americans were thinking about. The way that systems were failing people. The way that ordinary protection had to come from extraordinary intervention. The way that an elderly woman with a broken wrist had only been seen because her son had been able to mobilize 360 bikers. The story made people angry. The story also made people hopeful. Both of those reactions had a place in the cultural moment, and the story carried both of them. Doreen did not give interviews. Frank declined every request on her behalf. Sam stayed inside the small house in Wheeling, and the press never found him. The Hollisters had decided together that the story was not about them. The story was about the system and about the principle. They would let the story do its work without becoming celebrities. But the work the story did was significant. 3 weeks after the Intelligencer article, Patricia Voss announced major changes at St. Margaret's. A new intake protocol was implemented. Verification errors would no longer result in deferred status. They would result in immediate manual verification calls. Any patient with a wait time exceeding 90 minutes would trigger an automatic supervisor review. Bilingual signage was added. Veteran-specific liaisons were assigned to the emergency room. The board of directors voted to make Patricia's changes the new standard across the entire hospital network. St. Margaret's was part of a regional system of 7 hospitals, and the new protocols were rolled out across all of them within 4 months. The Federal Veterans Affairs Office became involved. They opened an investigation into similar patterns at hospitals across the country. The Hollister case became, in the technical jargon of healthcare policy, a documented incident of suspected systematic neglect of VA-insured patients. Over the next year, 14 hospitals across the United States made similar policy changes in response to the wider investigation. Brenda, the intake clerk, was not just fired. She was charged. The pattern that Patricia had uncovered turned out to be more than negligence. Brenda had been receiving small private payments from a third-party insurance verification service to flag VA and Medicare patients in ways that pushed them toward private pay alternatives. The scheme had been small and quiet. Brenda had been collecting about $300 a month, but the implications had been serious. She was indicted on federal healthcare fraud charges. She pleaded guilty in 2027 and received a sentence of 4 years in federal prison. The wider scheme, which involved several intake clerks at different hospitals, was eventually dismantled. The total damage was estimated at over $2 million in delayed and denied care. It had started in a hospital waiting room with a 73-year-old woman in a dark blue coat and a broken wrist. It had ended because 360 Hells Angels had been willing to ride through the cold November night to fix a problem the system had not been willing to fix on its own. The Hollisters did not stay quiet within their own community. The week after the news story broke, Doreen called Reuben Castile. She asked him to set up a meeting between her, Sam, and the chapter. Reuben suggested the chapter clubhouse in Pittsburgh, a small unmarked building in a working-class neighborhood that had been the chapter's headquarters since 1981. Doreen had never been inside. Sam had not been inside in 11 years, since his Parkinson's had made the drive difficult. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday afternoon. Sam was nervous all week. Doreen could see it. She made him talk through it on Wednesday evening. He confessed that he was afraid of how it would feel to walk into the clubhouse with his wife, to have his two lives, the life he had hidden from her and the life he had lived with her, finally occupy the same space. "Sam," Doreen said, "you have been afraid of this for 50 years. It is going to be uncomfortable for an hour. Then it is going to be fine. And then you're going to wish you had done it 40 years ago." She was right. The chapter had been preparing for the meeting all week. When Frank drove his parents to the clubhouse on Saturday afternoon, the small parking lot was already full. About 70 bikers were there, the active members of the Pittsburgh chapter, plus a handful of senior members from the surrounding chapters who Sam had been close to over the decades. Reuben was at the door. He helped Doreen out of the truck. He helped Sam. They walked into the clubhouse. The interior was simple. Wood-paneled walls, a long bar at one end, photographs of past members covering one entire wall, a small stage at the other end with a podium. The chapter had decorated the room with American flags and a few hand-lettered signs that said, "Welcome, Doreen." The bikers stood when Sam walked in, all 70 of them. They stood in respect, the way men stand when a former chapter president, an elder, a founder, a legend, enters a room. Sam stood in the doorway with his cane and his trembling hands. He looked at the men. Many of them were younger than him. A few were his age. He recognized every face. He had been there for almost all of them at some point. He had patched in many of them. He had buried some of their fathers. He had stood beside their hospital beds. He had loaned them money. He had given them advice. He had been their president. He started to cry. Reuben helped him to a chair. Doreen stayed beside him. The chapter waited. When Sam had collected himself, Reuben walked to the podium. He spoke briefly. "Brothers, I want to introduce someone who most of you have never met. Doreen Hollister, the woman who has been married to Sam for 51 years. The woman who, until last week, did not know that her husband was one of us. The woman who, last week, found out when 360 of us showed up at a hospital in West Virginia because she had been mistreated. Doreen has decided that she wants to know us. She wants to know the family she did not know she had. She is here today to meet you, to be welcomed, to be part of what Sam built. Let's give her a proper welcome." The chapter applauded. Doreen stood. She walked to the podium slowly, with Reuben's help. She looked out at the men. "I am not going to give a speech," Doreen said. Her voice was steady. "I am too old for speeches, and you do not need to hear one from me. I just want to say two things. The first is thank you. Thank you for last week. Thank you for 50 years of friendship with my husband that I did not know about. Thank you for being the family he had outside our small house. Thank you for showing up when it mattered." She paused. "The second thing is this. My husband does not have many years left. The doctors have told us, Sam, I am sorry to say this in front of everyone, but I think you would want me to. The doctors have told us that Sam's Parkinson's is progressing faster than they had hoped. He has maybe 3 years, maybe less. The rest of his time, however long it is, I want to share with him. All of it. Not just the part he has been sharing with me for 50 years. I want the full man. I want to meet his friends. I want to be at the rides. I want to come to the chapter dinners. I want to know what he built. I want to be part of it. She looked at the men. Will you have me? The bikers stood again. They applauded. Several of them were crying. Reuben helped Doreen back to her chair beside Sam. The chapter members came up one by one throughout the rest of the afternoon to introduce themselves to her. Each one shook her hand. Each one said his name. Each one told her, in some small way, what Sam had meant to him. Sam sat beside her and held her hand and listened to 70 men describe his life from the outside. He had heard versions of these stories before, fragments in chapter meetings over 50 years. He had never heard them all together. He had never heard them with his wife beside him. The combination was almost more than he could bear. By the time they drove home that evening, Doreen had a small notebook with the names of every man she had met. She had written each name down. She had written 1 or 2 words beside each name, something to help her remember the man. Vietnam, 1969. Daughter named Anna. Iraq, second tour. Lost brother in 2007. Sam patched in 1991, first sober ride after rehab. She had filled 4 pages of her notebook by the time they left. That night, after Sam had gone to bed, Doreen sat at the kitchen table and went through her notebook. She read every name. She made herself memorize them. She had decided that afternoon at the clubhouse that she was going to be the kind of wife who knew the names of her husband's brothers. She had 50 years to make up. She was going to make them up as fast as she could. The annual chapter dinner was held 3 weeks later. Doreen attended with Sam. She sat at the head table. She wore a blue dress that Sam had bought her for their 20th anniversary. She had her hair done. She looked like a woman who was finally where she should have been all along. The chapter presented her with a small leather vest. Not a cut, she was not being patched in, and the chapter had been careful to make the distinction respectfully. But a small leather vest with 1 patch on the back. Honorary Sister, Pittsburgh Chapter. The vest had been made for her over the previous 2 weeks by a leather worker who was a member of the chapter and who had done the work for free. Doreen put on the vest. It fit her perfectly. She wore it for the rest of the dinner. She wore it home in the truck. She hung it on a hook in the hallway beside Sam's cut. Sam's old cut from his presidency years, which had been hanging in their hallway closet, hidden behind coats for 46 years. Sam had retrieved it from the closet the night after Doreen had found out. He had hung it openly in the hallway. The 2 cuts hung side by side now. The first time in 51 years that the Hollister family had not been pretending. Sam Hollister died on August 17th, 2027. 21 months after the night at the hospital. 21 months of Doreen knowing the truth. 21 months of attending chapter dinners and meeting men and learning the names. 21 months of Sam getting to be, finally, the full version of himself in front of his wife. The Parkinsons took him at the end. He had been in hospice care at home for the last 6 weeks. Doreen had been with him every day. Frank had moved back from Pittsburgh for the final month. Reuben Castile had visited weekly. The chapter had set up a rotation, different members coming to sit with Sam for an hour or two at a time, taking turns being present, making sure Sam knew, in the small, careful ways that the chapter had developed over decades, that he was not alone. Sam died at 4:23 in the morning, with Doreen holding his hand. His last words had been, "Dor, I love you. Tell the boys. Ride safe." Doreen had told the boys. The funeral was held the following Tuesday. The funeral was a small church service by Sam's request. He had not wanted a big funeral. He had wanted a small church service, just for the immediate family and a few close friends. The Hells Angels had honored that request. Only 6 of them attended the church service: Reuben, Frank, and 4 other senior chapter members who had been close to Sam for decades. But the ride to the cemetery was different. When the small church service ended, Doreen and Frank walked out of the church behind Sam's casket. Outside, on the street in front of the church, 800 motorcycles waited. 800. Not just the Pittsburgh chapter, not just Cleveland and Erie and Wheeling and the 4 chapters that had come to the hospital. Chapters from across the United States, from Texas, from California, from Florida, from Massachusetts, from Oregon. Hells Angels chapters from across the country had sent representatives. Other clubs had sent representatives too. The Outlaws, the Bandidos, the Mongols, clubs that Sam had crossed paths with over 50 years, and that had developed, with him, the small, careful respect that veterans of any war develop for veterans of any other war. Patriot Riders had come. Marine Corps League members had come. Veterans of foreign wars riders had come. The procession that escorted Sam Hollister to his burial place had been organized at every level of the American motorcycle community. 800 motorcycles formed up behind the hearse. Doreen rode in the lead car with Frank. Reuben rode at the front of the motorcycle procession on Sam's old Harley, the bike Sam had ridden as chapter president, kept ready in Reuben's garage for moments like this. The procession moved slowly through Wheeling. The streets were lined with people. The local news had covered the death. Sam's identity had been released by the family, with permission after he died, and the community had come out to watch. Old men saluted as the casket passed. Children waved small American flags. Vietnam veterans stood on their porches in their old uniforms, watching the procession move past. The 800 motorcycles followed the hearse all the way to the small cemetery on the north side of Wheeling. They parked along the cemetery road in formation. The riders dismounted. They walked into the cemetery in 2 columns, organized by chapter, the way men walk into a sacred space. The graveside service was simple. The Marine Corps League provided military honors. 3 Marines folded the American flag that had been draped over Sam's casket. They presented the flag to Doreen. Taps was played by a bugler from the Marine Corps League. The casket was lowered. Reuben spoke at the graveside. Brothers, sisters, family. Sam Hollister was the man who taught most of us, in some small way or some big way, what it meant to be a brother. He taught us by example. He taught us by showing up. He taught us by carrying things he did not need to carry, for people who did not know he was carrying them. He taught us that the work of brotherhood is not done in public. It is done in private. It is done quietly. It is done because it needs to be done, and not because anyone is watching. Reuben paused. For 50 years, Sam taught us this lesson with his life. For the last 21 months, Sam taught us a final lesson. He taught us that It is never too late to be the full version of yourself in front of the people you love. He spent his last 21 months telling his wife the truth. He spent his last 21 months bringing his two lives together. He spent his last 21 months in the small mercy of being known. Doreen, Reuben turned and looked at her. Doreen gave him that mercy. She gave it to him by being the kind of woman who, when she finally learned the truth, did not run. She walked toward it. She walked toward us. She walked toward Sam. She gave him the last 21 months of his life. She gave him the gift of being known. There is no greater gift one human being can give another. Doreen was crying. She nodded. Sam asked me, a month ago, when I visited him at the house, what I would say at his funeral. I told him I did not know yet. I told him I would figure it out when the time came. He laughed. He said, "Reuben, you have been a chapter president. You know what to say. Just tell them I rode. Just tell them I rode hard, and I rode long, and I rode home. That is all you need to say." Reuben looked at the 800 bikers in the cemetery. Sam Hollister rode. He rode hard. He rode long. He rode home. Today we ride him to his last stop. Brothers, mount up. The 800 bikers returned to their motorcycles. They started their engines. The sound, 800 Harley-Davidson engines starting at once, filled the cemetery and the surrounding streets and the air above Wheeling. The deepest collective rumble of motorcycle engines that the city had ever heard. They rode out of the cemetery slowly. The procession turned west onto a country road, and the 800 motorcycles took a slow ceremonial ride that Sam had requested in his final wishes, a loop through the back roads of the Ohio Valley, the same loop Sam had been riding for 50 years, ending at a small overlook above the Ohio River that Sam had loved. At the overlook, the bikers parked. They stood in silence for 10 minutes. They looked at the river. They thought about Sam. Then they got back on their bikes and they rode home, in waves, back to the chapters they had come from, back to their lives. The funeral was over. Sam Hollister was buried. Doreen lived for another 4 years. She did not stop attending chapter events. She kept her honorary sister vest. She came to the dinners. She came to the rides. She rode in the back of a sidecar attached to Reuben's bike for several smaller rides. She was, for the last 4 years of her life, what she had wanted to be, a full member of the family Sam had built without her. She died of natural causes in November of 2031, 4 years and 3 months after Sam, 81 years old, peaceful, in her sleep, in the same bed she had shared with Sam for 51 years. Frank was with her at the end. He had moved into the house permanently after Sam died, to take care of his mother. He had brought his family with him. The 3 grandchildren had grown up in the small Hollister house in Wheeling. They had known their grandmother in her honorary Hell's Angels vest. They had known her at chapter dinners. They had known her the only way they had ever known her, as a woman who was part of a family larger than any of them could fully see. Doreen's funeral was attended again by 800 motorcycles. The chapters came back. The procession rolled through Wheeling again. She was buried beside Sam. The story of what happened at St. Margaret's Hospital in November of 2025 is still told. It is told at the Pittsburgh Chapter Clubhouse. It is told at the Cleveland Chapter Clubhouse. It is told at chapter clubhouses across the country. It is told to new members during their initiations. It is told to journalists who write about the Hell's Angels and who want to include a story that humanizes the club. It is told to the grandchildren of the bikers who were there that night. The story has different versions. Different bikers remember different details. The number of motorcycles in the parking lot has grown, in some versions, to over 500. The cold has gotten colder. The hospital administrator has gotten more impressive in her response. But the core of the story is always the same. A 73-year-old woman was being denied care in an emergency room. Her son made 3 phone calls. 360 motorcycles arrived. A hospital was changed. A federal investigation began. A policy was rewritten. 14 hospitals across the country adopted new protocols. A woman was treated. And, most importantly, an old Marine got to spend the last 21 months of his life being fully known by his wife. That is the story. The story is small. The story is also enormous. The story is what happens when a brotherhood that the world dismisses as outlaws turns out to be, in the moments that matter, the only people willing to do the work that the system has been failing to do. The story is what happens when the people who have been quietly carrying things for 50 years are finally seen by the people they love. The story is what happens when 360 Hell's Angels decide that the rules they ride by are bigger than the rules of any hospital. That is the story of Doreen Hollister and Sam Hollister, and the night the Pittsburgh chapter rode to West Virginia. That is the story of a small woman in a dark blue coat who walked into a hospital with a broken wrist. That is the story of an old Marine who built a second life that his wife did not know about. That is the story of the brotherhood that came when it was called. That is the story